Okay. Second thing here, I wanted to spend some time talking about the Bundesliga. Obviously, it returned over the weekend. You got a slate of midweek games that we're in the middle of here. And there are two major storylines I want to cover here. The first, of course, is what Gio Reyna has done. After everything he went through during the World Cup, after the World Cup, and he was just kind of sitting there not playing because Dortmund were on this winter break, he comes out, he scores not one but two game winners off the bench. Now, before I get into the Reyna thing, this Dortmund team continues to confuse me. They continue to not be as good as I feel like they should be defensively. I really thought this was going to be solved with these center backs they bought, and, they had to win a 4-3 thriller in their first game back. Now, defensively, it was better the second time around. But they found a way to get these wins. And not all of the teams above them have been able to do that, which I'll get to in a minute here. So, positive signs for Dortmund. I'm still not putting too much stock in these couple of wins in terms of I expect them to qualify for the Champions League because they are clearly one of the four best teams in Germany. I'm not going to overreact to getting a couple wins based on how their season has gone. Now, the Reyna part of this. The celebrations, and specifically the first one. You can read all kinds of stuff into that. It certainly seemed like he was trying to imply some things with the celebrations he chose, the connection to Memphis Depay, the connection of what Greg Berhalter said about Memphis Depay, all of that. I'm not going to really try and analyze what's going on in Gio Reyna's mind. I have a personal philosophy that I don't do that. I inherited it from my father and I believe in it. It certainly seemed like this was a shot at Greg Berhalter. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. That's not really what I want to talk about here. I want to talk about kind of the reaction to this and putting this in its proper context. The first thing is, if that really was directed towards Berhalter, Greg Berhalter probably is not going to play a role in the rest of Gio Reyna's career. Now, yes, there's a possibility he still gets the U.S. men's national team job. I just don't see that happening. At some point, this is, and I understand this is, these are Gio's first games back. At some point, you got to move on from this, though. From a Berhalter specific standpoint. Because we really don't need to make this into a whole thing. Generally speaking, now if you want to say that Berhalter had questions about Gio Reyna's talent based on the way he decided to use him in the World Cup, then fine. Generally speaking, though, nobody is questioning Gio Reyna's talent. Nobody is questioning that Gio Reyna should have seen more playing time during the World Cup. Nobody is questioning that Gio Reyna deserves a spot on the U.S. men's national team, or that Gio Reyna is whether Gio Reyna can play in the Champions League at a club like Dortmund. Nobody's questioning any of that. All you saw was people going to bat for Gio Reyna saying, why isn't he being relied on more? He's better than the players that are getting more playing time than him, that are getting, sent on as substitutes ahead of him. There isn't anything Gio Reyna needs to prove, generally speaking, on the field. And at some point, we got to move on from the Berhalter. Now, we're not going to move on until all this actually gets sort of sorted and decisions are made about Berhalter's future and all of that. And, right, the connection between what Reyna's parents did, what Reyna knew about it, how he feels about... That's the part I don't want to get into because I just don't know. And we probably never will know. This could be exclusively coming from Gio Reyna is just furious that Greg Berhalter publicly threw him under the bus. It could be as simple as that. And the other part of this is that nobody is excusing Greg Berhalter's role in this. Everybody is saying, you got to be better than that. You can't do that. That is poor leadership. So we kind of got to separate this stuff. And I hope that Gio Reyna is also able to separate this stuff. Because these goals, great for him, great for Dortmund, great to see a U.S. men's national team player scoring important goals in the Bundesliga. But he could score a goal every single game the rest of the season for Dortmund. It doesn't answer the questions that are being left with what has happened. Because those questions are about attitude, behavior, mental toughness, resiliency, whatever other words you want to throw in there. Nobody is questioning Gio Reyna's talent. And so to see the immediate reaction appear to be to go after Greg Berhalter is not a great look when you are questioning somebody's maturity. Now again, he's at the very beginning of his career. Nobody's got it all together at his age. Which is where, again, I just want to move on from all of this if I'm him. And so kind of seeming to go after Berhalter, not a huge fan of it. But the bigger point that I want to get back to here is not every goal is a referendum on Gio Reyna. His performance at Dortmund is not a referendum on his status with the U.S. men's national team. Because we need to see how Gio Reyna carries himself in that environment again. This would be different if we were talking about, for example, Ricardo Pepi. Right? And Ricardo Pepi goes on an absolute tear after getting left off the World Cup roster. And it's clear, or Paul Arriola, whoever you want to point to. And is clearly just taking going to another level and using all of that pain, that disappointment, that frustration to elevate their game and say, can't control what happened, but you can make it clear to whoever's going to be in charge of the U.S. moving forward, it was a mistake I was left off that World Cup roster. Who is Gio Reyna trying to prove that to other than Greg Berhalter? And why are we asking Gio Reyna to prove anything on the field? That's the part of this that I'm a little confused about, is that, he doesn't need to make a statement with every goal. I understand the emotions of, I wasn't a huge fan. I'm not getting worked up about his celebrations. This is more about the response to the celebrations and from the U.S. men's national team fan perspective. We don't need to make this bigger than it is. He scored a couple important goals for his team. One of them was a brilliant goal. That's awesome. It doesn't prove anything because he can't prove what he needs to prove and re-earn his teammates' trust. By the way, his teammates who, don't play for Dortmund, by scoring goals, because nobody's questioning his ability to do that. What I want to know, and what I'm sure his teammates want to know, is the next time you get into a situation where you're asked to play a role on a team or things aren't going well, play a role that you don't like, you're struggling, whatever it might be, how are you going to respond to that? Because you see what Paul Arriola said, talking about why he was in this U.S. men's national team camp. He said, if I have a kid one day, I want my kid to be able to look at me and say, after, the biggest disappointment of my life, not making that roster when it seemed like he was going to, I picked myself up and I went again. That's the kind of thing you need to see from Gio Reyna, and you can't see it based on scoring goals in the Bundesliga. And we're not going to be able to see it for a while. It's just a question that's going to linger until we're getting into Gold Cups, hopefully a Copa America, 2026 World Cup. All Gio Reyna can do at this point is perform well, which obviously he's doing, and try and move forward from this. And so I just want to see, first of all, let's just all, again, try and keep this all in perspective. And for everybody's benefit, the less we can make this about stuff that has already happened, the better. And This is the first time he's playing, so it's inevitable. It's going to come up. It's going to come up again once the U.S. hires a coach, once these investigations are done, all of that. But we don't need to be freaking out because Gio Reyna scored a couple goals. And hopefully Gio Reyna is focusing forward, not on Greg Berhalter. Because if that's the person he's trying to prove things to, and again, I completely understand why he, outside of everything that happened with his parents, why he would be so frustrated that Berhalter threw him under the bus like that. I totally get it. And, can't put yourself in the mind of Gio Reyna. But I do hope collectively we just look forward with all of this and not make things bigger than they need to be. Not make every goal a referendum on Gio Reyna and who was right and who was wrong. Because we love to just run to the drama. And it's better for Gio, right? Gio Reyna, more than anybody else, needs to move on from all of this because of how it's made him look and what got exposed about his behavior at the World Cup. And so part of that is, to his credit, right, drawing headlines in a much more positive way by scoring key goals for his team and winning games for his team. And the next part of this is actually collectively moving on from all of this and there is no way to undo what has happened, and it's going to take a long time for Gio Reyna to, if he ever can, kind of regain the spot he had in terms of how his teammates feel about him, how the U.S. men's national team fan base feels about him, all of that. This has been incredibly ugly. But there's just this tendency to sort of pull everything we possibly can out of every little moment, and there's just no need to do it. He scored a couple goals. Terrific. The stuff, as I've been saying, the stuff he needs to actually show, the work he has to do to rebuild these relationships and rebuild trust within that team, has nothing to do with his talent. Because nobody's doubting his talent. It's about how do you handle yourself, how do you behave, how do you prove that you're more mature and are going to respond differently to similar situations if they come up in the future, all of that kind of stuff. And none of those questions are going to be answered with goals for Borussia Dortmund. The other thing I want to get to on the Bundesliga side is that Bayern have drawn twice in 2 games since coming back from the winter break. They were dead even against Leipzig if you look at the balance of play. If you look at the expected goals, the score line, there was nothing between those teams. Not a bad result. Those are the kind of games, if you're trying to win, if you've got a lead, you're trying to win a title, making sure people don't gain points on you in games like that is all you really need to do. But then they followed that up with a Köln performance that looked incredibly similar to that stretch where they kept drawing and then lost a game in the Bundesliga and kind of fell off the face of the earth for about a month there. It's not that they don't dominate games. It's not that they don't create chances. They just don't create enough chances where it feels inevitable that they're going to score. And they, give up one goal. And all of a sudden, or they give up a strange second goal or whatever it might be. It's not that you look at the overall balance of play and, right there are times where Manchester City just don't do anything. Bayern are never like that. Or there'll be games, right? Spurs in the first half just don't show up. Bayern always dominate games, and they do always create chances. But usually you feel like there's this sense of inevitability with it. That they're just going to keep knocking on the door. Eventually the goal's going to come. Eventually they're going to get the winner, whatever it might be. And there was just this stretch this season where that wasn't happening. Or they would respond once and then they would give up a sloppy goal. And until the 90th minute, it looked like they were going to lose this game at home. And then Joshua Kimmich pulls out one of the goals of the season out of nowhere. And drills that must have been 30, 35 yards, drills the ball off the inside of the crossbar to get them a draw. It wasn't even that they're, the pressure they kept applying inevitably ultimately led to a goal. It was just Joshua Kimmich pulling out a miracle. So this is something I'm now very interested in again, because after they had that awful stretch, they won, they had, I think it was 8, 9, 10 games, something like that, heading into the World Cup break where they won every single one of them. They looked like Bayern again. Because they have, the Borussia Mönchengladbach game, it always seems like. They've got that weird one where they draw because now their goalkeeper, Jan Sommer, makes 15 saves or whatever. Leipzig, they can have some struggles with. Dortmund gets them from time to time. Right, they do have slip-ups. But the one thing they have been so good at is not piling bad performances on top of each other and not dropping points in, 3 games out of 5, back-to-back games, all of that kind of stuff. And they're doing that this season. And then it stopped, and now it started again. Now, Freiburg have had a rough return. Obviously, Leipzig dropped 2 points against Bayern, so they aren't 6 for 6. And so now what you have is Union Berlin are 3 points back. You got 4 other teams within 5 points, including Leipzig and Borussia Dortmund. So nobody is really putting extreme pressure on Bayern yet. And that's one of the things that Bayern have been really good about, is by the time you get into the, second, third, or second half of the season, even if somebody's close, they're always trying to play from behind. Usually it's Dortmund. And that's the same case this season. For a minute there, you had teams ahead of them, and then those teams started slipping up, and Bayern piled after win after win after win, and retook control of the league. That is the one thing they have avoided, is everybody's still chasing them. But this is going to be a title race to the end if they keep this up. Because one of these teams, whether it's Union Berlin, whether Dortmund get incredibly hot, I still think Leipzig are the most likely out of all of these teams. I do think somebody is going to be good enough because you have so many options. Maybe Freiburg pull it back together. Somebody is going to make Bayern earn this. I don't think anybody's going to have enough to take it from Bayern. But I do see a world in which, it's a 3-point gap heading into the last game of the season. And if something bizarre happens, like that Köln game, and Joshua Kimmich isn't there to score a worldie, maybe, just maybe, this gets real interesting.